Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely. And parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/getstarted. That's GREENLIGHT.com/getstarted.
So then I get my foot in there to keep it wedged open, right?
No, man, not right. Not right.
Why would you think that would be a good answer?
You guys sound identical to the manager of that petting zoo right now. This is a little ridiculous.
Surprise!
Whoa, dude. What's with all the electronics and stuff?
And all these working guys.
It's for this week's episode. I know how much you like the ISIS space station, you know, the subject of this week's essay, and it took some doing, but once I told the guys they could use our studio, they all came right down to check it out.
Oh, dude, that is so cool. Thank you. Yeah. Are these the guys in the hoods? Are they scientists?
Yeah, I didn't even realize scientists dressed like that, but apparently they do. Yeah, they're all super friendly.
Is this dynamite?
No, Tom, it's probably like a space propulsion thing for the ISIS space station. It's you know.
Sorry, Eli, it's a small correction. It's called the International Space Station. Like calling it the ISS space station, it's like saying ATM machine.
Oh, so no. I checked. It's definitely ISIS space station. See, it's on their stationery. It's all written out.
Okay.
All right. Fuck. Eli brought terrorists into the studio again, didn't he?
He sure did, Tom.
God.
I'll go over and reset the sign to 0 days.
Oh,
again.
come on. They're not. Actually, you know what? Now a lot of what they've been saying makes sense because I was confused.
Hello and welcome to Citation Needed, podcast where we choose a subject, read a single article about it on Wikipedia, and pretend we're experts because this is the internet. That's how it works now. I'm Cecil, and I'll be counting us down. But for this launch to work, I'll need a booster, a thruster, and a load. Tom, Noah, and Eli.
You know, as the booster, a lot relies on my O-rings, and I'm down for all challengers.
Oh, Jesus. No, I like mine though. Because I make subtle corrections throughout the mission, right? So like thrusters are like the pedants of space flight. Right? It's good stuff.
And mine is load, really, Cecil? In the same year as my botched vasectomy? Too soon, sir. Too soon.
Botched vasectomy? Did you get somebody else pregnant? What happened? Botched vasectomy? What are you talking
Cecil
about?
doesn't know I have 3 balls.
Cecil
right
doesn't know.
now.
I don't think. Yeah, no.
You
He
had
doesn't know about your
COVID.
botched vasectomy.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Anyway, I'd like to take a second to thank our wonderful patrons for being our lifeline. And if you'd like to learn how to fill our tanks with liquid hydrogen, be sure to stick around till the end of the show. And with that out of the way, tell us, Eli, what person, place, thing, concept, phenomenon, or event we'll be talking about today.
The International Space Station.
Cool. And Noah, you traveled days to see a once-in-a-lifetime astronomy event obscured by clouds. That's not a lead, and I just wanted to say that to make you mad before we read anything. I just wanted to say that.
It was one cloud. It was just one eclipse-sized cloud all by itself in an otherwise cloudless fucking sky.
That's so bad. That's terrible.
Oh, Noah, what was the International Space Station?
Yeah, it depends on when you're listening to this, I guess. Okay. So there are actually 2 very distinct ways of answering that, depending on what you want to emphasize. Because the International Space Station, or ISS, is a 460-ton football field-sized marvel of cutting-edge technology that's whizzing around 250 miles above the Earth at nearly 5 miles a second and was built through unprecedented international cooperation. But it's also a rickety $150 billion space dinosaur that's older than Heath's car, was built with dial-up technology, cost over $3 billion a year to maintain, and never really justified its existence despite being the single most expensive thing ever built.
See, now I don't know whether you're talking about Branson or Bezos. I don't.
Oh, and fun fact, Cecil, just last week, Bezos' Blue Origin dick rocket prematurely blew and popped its little mushroom head before delivering its payload, leaving everyone disappointed.
Never happened to it before, yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. It's just, space stuff is useless and expensive. It's kind of my thing on these essays. So how would you like it if I stole all of your stuff? I'm like, quack, quack, quack. History angles. I'm alone on a dock. Someone please love me. Right? I don't do your guys' thing.
I offered both. I offered Cecil's and your position in my own. So the idea for a space station goes back to at least 1883, when a Russian aerospace engineer named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky wrote a book called Free Space, which included sketches for what he thought a space station might look like. It became a staple of science fiction as the genre emerged, and the idea of a permanently inhabited space station orbiting the Earth was a shared dream amongst pretty much all of the early pioneers of space technology. So much so, in fact, that pretty much the minute the technology made that remotely possible, world governments started sinking billions of dollars into the idea without ever clearly articulating what the point of having one would be.
Yeah, that's pretty much my wife's argument against an in-home frozen custard machine. The exact same argument.
Let it out, buddy. Let it out.
Hey, if sinking money into pointless things was a bad thing to do, how do you explain how any of us make our livings?
Oh, so I never said this was a bad thing. Okay, so let me
Did
be
the
super
Kumite
clear.
essay, Tom?
So the first effort at a space station came, of course, from Russia. In 1971, the Soviet government launched Salyut-1. That was the first of 8 stations in the Salyut program. And this thing was tiny, right? It was a cylinder that was 66 feet, that's 20 meters or so long, with a maximum diameter of 13 feet or 4 meters. Right? So, it wouldn't quite fit on a standard flatbed trailer, but it would come really close. But it was successfully launched into orbit, and a crew of 3 cosmonauts did successfully dock with it and spent 23 days aboard it. This was the first time anyone ever docked with an orbiting object in space, and it was a new record for the longest anyone ever spent in space. An achievement that was somewhat undercut by the fact that the crew died on the way back down when a valve opened prematurely and asphyxiated them. Yeah. So as of this record, by the way, that marks the only time anyone ever died in space.
They actually would have been just fine, but the Russians were collecting space first, like this was Pokemon Go, and dying in orbit was on the list.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a checklist.
Wasn't even last on the list. It's a whole thing, yeah.
Now, so after the accident, the USSR scrapped their next planned launch until they could redesign the Soyuz. That's the spacecraft that was meant to take people back and forth to the Salyut-1. Unfortunately, that redesign took so long that they couldn't get anybody back in time to do the routine maintenance the station needed to survive, so they deorbited it after 6 months and 1 crew.
Yeah, and nobody even got a free taco. It was losses all around, everybody.
It's a different one, but yeah. So the U.S. joined the space station game a couple years later with Skylab. This is the only space station that was ever operated exclusively by the U.S. It was launched in the last flight of the Saturn V rocket. That's the one that took the astronauts to the moon. Except that unlike the Apollo missions, the big main fuel stage didn't disengage and fall back to the Earth. Instead, it was boosted just a bit higher and then used as the main structure for the station itself. Now, unlike the Russian space station, this space station had a clearly defined reason to exist, so that the Russians wouldn't have the only one.
Stupid Russians and their unbelievably expensive, pointless tube of disposable floating men. I'll show them. I'll launch my own unbelievably expensive tube of disposable floating men.
Yes. Yep. So Skylab lasted a little bit longer than Salyut-1. It suffered major damage, though, when the micrometeoroid shield tore away from the main workshop area. And this unexpected departure not only left it vulnerable to micrometeoroids, but it also carried one of the main solar panels with it and jammed into another one. So the station was left running on a small fraction of the electric power it was supposed to have.
Yeah. See, Greg Abbott was right. Renewable fuels are just too unpredictable.
Boy, whenever you talk about running on a small fraction of the electric power you're supposed to have, Greg Abbott is going to come up. Yeah. But even worse, though, those solar panels were also keeping the direct sunlight off the skin of the workshops. And without it, the crews were subjected to brutal internal temperatures. Eventually, NASA mitigated the problem by, no shit, sending up a big-ass curtain that they could hang off the side of the station.
Yeah, they could just hook the curtain right up to the VW camper van hood ornament. Perfect.
Got a unicorn on it and everything.
Yeah,
It's actually pretty sweet. Yeah.
It looks really good. Now, ultimately, though, Skylab was doomed from the start. See, to keep a space station in orbit, it has to be periodically boosted. And where Salyut and the ISS have the ability to do that all by their lonesome, Skylab didn't. The plan was to use the space shuttle to periodically nudge it back into place by docking underneath it. The problem with that plan, though, was that the space shuttle didn't exist yet.
What?
Yeah. Right. Well, and unfortunately, it wasn't the one single thing in the history of space exploration that was finished on time. So when it came time for them to give it its first orbital nudge, the space shuttle was still years away from its first flight. Only 4 3-person crews would ever inhabit the $2.2 billion station. And in 1979, it returned to the Earth in a very much uncontrolled re-entry.
Jesus Christ.
Debris showered Western Australia, and there was quite a bit of debris. The fact that it didn't hit any people or destroy any structures was just a happy coincidence. As it stands, the worst thing that came from it was a $400 fine that the municipal government in Australia issued to NASA for littering in this instance.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like it would take a fair bit of convincing for those 3-member crews to hang out in a steadily descending scuba tank miles above the Earth with the reassurance of, don't worry, it'll stay there as long as we invent a way for it to stay there.
NASA's like a shitty dad picking him up late from school. Sorry, I had to wait till my blood alcohol level was low enough to blow and the thing start to cry. Get in. It's 2 for 2 at Tuba Tuesdays. Get in.
All right. So meanwhile, by the way, Russia is up to Salyut 6 with a couple more stations in the works. And unlike the NASA station, which was at least publicly all about scientific discoveries and pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, the Russians had both civilian and military stations in operation. So very much an area where the U.S. is lagging behind. And who should assume office the year after that embarrassing NASA crash into Australia but the coldest of Cold Warriors, Ronald Wilson Reagan, whose full name, by the way, is an anagram for Insane Anglo Warlord. I just learned that the other day. I love that more than anything. So anyway, Reagan announces plans to build a new and better space station during his 1984 State of the Union address. In a moment remembered for the historic wrongness of its premise, goals, and execution, Reagan predicted that crewed space travel would be a major economic driver in the near future and tasked NASA with building a space station within the next 10 years. The fact that in 1984 was the impetus for the ISS tells you how thoroughly NASA missed that deadline.
Reagan only did this because he thought with a complicated pulley system, the space station could just reel up the NASDAQ. He was hoping.
He didn't actually put a lot of thought into coming back to Earth because he just figured the astronauts would trickle down.
Yeah, well, the last station worked. But yeah, okay, so the first appropriation bills that funded what would eventually be known as the International Space Station came shortly after that speech for a station that was named with trademark American pomposity, Space Station Freedom. But the American project took on an international flavor pretty quickly. Within a year of its announcement, the European Space Agency announced that they'd be building a module that would attach to that station. And a year after that, the Japanese Space Agency, JAXA, announced the same.
Okay, well, maybe if we hadn't named our guys the astronauts, other countries wouldn't just assume we'd open our hatches and let them dock in us just for showing up.
Are you kidding? Everyone at NASA was like, guys, be cool. This is the closest anyone in this building will ever get to being popular. Just say yes. Let everyone dock on our things.
All right, so
bring extra ice cream.
So meanwhile, though, while America and its buddies are sipping hot cocoa and drawing up plans for their awesome space fort, Russia has moved on from orbiting shipping containers to the Mir space station. Now, that's only unimpressive today because we have the ISS to compare it to. Mir was the first space station to be built at sea, so to speak, with a number of different modules launched separately and then assembled in orbit over time, right? So until then, space stations were limited in size to what you could realistically strap to a rocket. Also, unlike previous stations, it was continuously crewed. Okay, so with the previous ones, a crew would go up, they'd do their thing for a few weeks, and then they'd come back and leave the craft empty until the next crew showed up. But with Mir, Crew 1 doesn't leave until Crew 2 shows up. In all, Mir would be occupied for about 12 and a half of the 15 years that it spent in orbit.
Oh, can you imagine how much that thing must have fucking smelled?
Right?
Like 15 years just collecting everyone's farts and BO, and then if you open the window, suddenly you're the bad guy.
Tom, I almost included an entire paragraph in this essay about that. Yes, every fart is saved in the ISS. I mean, you can't vent it. Yeah. So the first module for Mir is launched in 1986. A couple years after that, the country that built it fell apart. With the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a significant thaw in U.S.-Russian relations, and the space station Freedom was still on the drawing board. So eventually, NASA admitted that Russians were way better at building space stations than us. Of the 8 successful stations that had operated to that point, 7 of them were Russian, and asked if maybe they, the newly impoverished nation that they were, wanted to go in on a space station. So in September of 1993, then Vice President Al Gore and Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin, however the hell his name is pronounced, held a joint press conference where they announced that they'd be merging the planned follow-up to Mir with the perpetually planned space station Freedom in a joint effort that they dubbed the International Space Station.
Well, we actually reached out to the Russians to see if they could help us get to the topic before the first break, but their only advice was to stop Stalin. And with that, a little apropos of nothing. Thank you, Eli. Thank you.
Shit.
Apropos
Thank you,
of
Eli.
nothing.
Thank you. Mwah.
All right, gentlemen, this is a big moment. Meeting of the Russians and Americans for the first time in space. Let's be on our best behavior.
Sir, yes, sir.
Greetings, and may I be the first to...
Wow, look at this. Americans get Butler here to take my spacesuit. Here you go,
Oh,
baby.
no, actually, I was not.
I bring soup where I put it. Where I put
Jesus, keep that away from the air vents.
No touch soup till dinner. No touch soup till dinner.
Ergey, please be understand. They do not know about soup till dinner.
Gentlemen, I have to admit I'm more than a little shocked at this behavior. This is a meeting of superpowers, not a potluck. Now, can we please get to the business we all traveled to space in the hopes of accomplishing?
Oh, he's right, Ergey.
I am ashamed for myself.
Okay. I go get turnips, you get blue jeans, we start trading right away.
You have Wrangler. I like Wrangler.
Okay.
Before the break, we were about to perfect strangers our way into a space station. Let's get back into it.
Oh, the sitcom that never was. So in 1984, Reagan challenged NASA to build a new space station within 10 years. Then he starved the government of funding at every goddamn opportunity, which is at least part of the reason why we didn't even start building the first components for the damn thing until his 10-year deadline was pretty much over.
Oh, typical nerd excuses. We need more funding. Stop accusing us of faking the moon landing. Where's your gumption, Noah Regions? Where's your gumption?
So the ISS is basically put together Lego style, right? Different modules are
If
built
you step
in different...
on it barefoot, it hurts like hell.
I would imagine it would, right?
Yeah.
But no, I mean that different modules are built in different facilities in different countries. Then they're launched into space and fitted into the larger structure through a combination of spacewalks and robotics. Now, the first U.S. components included the integrated truss structure that acted as the station's initial skeleton and the solar array that acted as its main power supply, as well as 2 modules named Destiny and Unity. Now, Destiny serves as the main U.S. science lab, and the aptly named Unity is the node that connects the U.S. and Russian sections of the space station and includes the communal dining area.
Weird rules in the dining room. You have to eat figs until you cross the international date line. Dates.
Got it.
Fruit.
The fruit. Yep.
It's a fruit. Thank you, Eli Bosnick. Appreciate it.
Keith will be back next week. Don't worry, Cecil.
A module named Destiny? I'm sorry, was a module covered in glitter and maybe only going to be in town for a limited time?
Thank you. time. Also, what the hell is NASA going to do when they run out of inspiring words? Right? Are we 50 years away from the Starship Warm Toast?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a real problem. That's a real problem down there. Okay, so now when I refer to the U.S. and Russian sections, by the way, you should picture this like an 80s sitcom cliche where like two warring roommates draw a line down the middle of the apartment. Okay. While it represents unprecedented cooperation between the two countries, the ISS was always a marriage of convenience, and thus it was always a marriage that included separate beds. That's actually one of the main reasons there's so much concern now over the sanctions against Russia and how they're going to affect the project. The station literally can't keep itself in orbit if there isn't somebody on the Russian side to fire those thrusters. And by the way, you can bet your ass Putin has threatened to crash the whole goddamn thing in a snit over Ukraine.
Okay, well, if I know my 80s sitcoms, and believe me, I do, all we need is to team up in a big space race against the mean kids from across town, and everything will go back to normal.
Putin's on China's side, though. Now,
that's fair.
The very first module to launch for the thing was the Russian module, the Zarya. It was launched in November of 1998. Basically, it was a mini self-contained space station that provided the initial power, storage, propulsion, and guidance while all the other shit was built around it. Now, at this point, it's basically the ISS's shed, but it was like the whole thing when it started.
There's a lawnmower in it. Why did we even bring this thing? Doesn't make any sense out here at all.
Post hole digger, what? So the second Russian module was the Zvezda, which provides the station's initial life support systems. That was launched in July of 2000. It was only after that one was attached that the first crews could move in. So normally when we're talking about the ISS's birthday, people will cite either the 1998 date when the first module went into orbit or the 2000 date when the first crew arrived.
Right. Like how Mormons don't think you have a soul till you're 9 or whatever.
Yeah, it's like that. Right. Now, of course, characterizing the whole thing as a U.S.-Russian venture isn't exactly accurate. Right. The European Space Agency also contributed several modules, most notably the Columbus Laboratory, which was designed in Germany and built in Italy. And the single largest module on the station was built by the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA. It's called the Kibo, or the Japanese Experimental Module. And like the Columbus, it serves primarily as a laboratory. But that's not like there isn't a Japanese and European wing of the station. The Japanese and European modules are just fitted to the U.S. side.
Okay, am I the only one picturing a bunch of space scientists just like bumping around a spaceship full of floating Bunsen burners and beakers and shit? Just
See, I was picturing what it must have been like when the Germans saw what the Italians did with their designs.
Comrade Nudlini, thank you so much for giving us this tour of the newly built space station module. I hear you have a name for it.
Of course we do. We're gonna call it the Columbus.
Like Christopher Columbus, the genocidal ship captain most notable for the misdiscovery of new worlds?
That's the one.
I see. Also, your letter said you'd made some special modifications to the design.
Of course, no offense, but your team, they left a lot unfinished. For instance, there was no place to put the pizza oven. But don't worry, we turned the engine inside out and now we can have a nice, fresh pizza pies.
Okay, Eli, are you sure this sketch isn't racist?
Nope, we are still good. Italians, fair game.
I am going to kill you both. Both of you.
Now, because of the piecemeal way that it was constructed, it's hard to say when the ISS was finished, right? Like the newest major module was added as recently as 2021, and there are still a couple of power modules that are set to launch for it. And for that reason, it's hard to say how old it is.
Ooh, the spaceship of syphilis.
I really hope you mean Theseus.
I do not.
So different parts are radically different ages.
Fuck, I feel you, space station. Fucking hell, man.
The back is always the oldest of all, yeah. So, but the oldest parts of this thing are just shy of the quarter-century mark. Okay, these parts include shit like the scaffolding that holds it all together and the node where all the major parts connect. Right, so for all intents and purposes, it's a 20-plus-year-old space station.
Yeah, there is no way Leo DiCaprio would date it. Not a chance. Not a chance.
Oh, Leonardo DiCaprio, anagram of periodic anal odor. That ties in too.
Nice.
Yeah.
There you go.
So in its present configuration, there are 39 total modules, 16 of which are pressurized, meaning that they're part of the spaceship's interior space, right? And I'm sure you've all heard before that the ISS is about the size of a football field. But since that's including solar panels and shit, I don't think that gives people a very good sense of the practical size. So in terms of interior space, it's about as spacious as like a 6-bedroom house. Right, you could play a pretty mean game of hide and seek inside that motherfucker.
You're just wandering around the ISS. I think China is sus.
No, of course, as I'm sure most of the listeners know, the crew members aboard the ISS aren't weightless because they're so far from the Earth, but rather because they're in orbit. Right, the gravity where the ISS spends its time is actually about 90% as strong as it is here on the surface of the Earth. So, like, it's enough of a difference that you'd probably notice it, but not so much that you'd float around. The reason the astronauts float is that they're traveling at free fall speeds inside an environment that's falling at that same speed. That speed, of course, is fast as all fuck. Okay, 17,500 miles per hour. Or Jesus. 28,000 kilometers an hour, meaning that the ISS travels so fast that it orbits the planet every 90 minutes. Like at that speed, it would take the thing a single day to travel to the goddamn moon and back.
Fucking hell.
Right? Now, if you really want to get a sense of how fast this is, you can actually watch it zip by. It's bright enough in the night sky to give Venus a run for its money, and there are plenty of free apps that'll tell you where it is and when it's going to be zipping by your particular night sky.
They're just falling the whole time. So basically, every astronaut really is Buzz Lightyear, just falling with style.
Yeah, actually.
Sorry, Noah, Heath's not here, so he asked me to do this. Or you could see NASA running a laser pointer across the firmament to make you think you see a space station from those apps. Interesting.
All right. So as of the latest data I could find, a total of 251 people from 20 different countries have visited the station. And that number includes no fewer than 7 space tourists. And actually, I think that count is low. But from all the accounts that I've found, the tourists had a miserable time and their grapes were sour anyway. See, since the space shuttle program was shuttered, the crews flying back and forth always have to go on the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. And Russia is, generally speaking, a bit hard up for money. So whenever there was a spare seat that they didn't need for a crew member, they would sell it for $40 million to a member of the public. Yeah, right? But of course, they would like make the person go through a probably won't die up their level medical exam. But if they passed that, they could go up. Incidentally, NASA and the ESA were pissed when Russia started doing this and even initially refused to train the first space tourists that were slated to go up.
Okay, if a rich person signs up for this, they should be forced to take all their money with them. So if something goes wrong, they burst and their riches fall down on us like Sonic's stash of rings. That's how it should work.
You know what? That would get people watching the launches again, Cecil. This is a good idea.
Right? So now visits to the station vary in length, obviously, but the non-tourist trips typically last about 6 months. The record holders are cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov and astronaut Mark T. Van High, who spent 355 days aboard it together, though this time doesn't even crack the top 3 for the longest any person has stayed aboard any space station. Mir has that record several times. Normally, there are 3 to 6 people aboard, but it's held as many as 13 on multiple occasions. There are 7 sleep stations and different modules, which are about as roomy as your average telephone booth. Basically, they're human-sized soundproof compartments with low light. Right, so astronauts have the choice of strapping themselves to a wall or just float sleeping, but by all accounts, nobody sleeps particularly well there. When they've got more than 7 people aboard, they have to start using sleep compartments on the spaceships that those people arrived on to accommodate the overflow.
Maybe the geniuses of unfathomable intellect who figured out space travel could figure out sleeping quarters a little better than Burning Man, maybe? Like, could they spend an afternoon, fellas?
I feel like they worked it out. Of course, one of the hardest questions to answer about the ISS is what exactly it does here. Right? So, like, when early visionaries like Arthur C. Clarke and Wernher von Braun first envisioned space stations, they saw them as staging grounds for interplanetary missions and hubs of space commerce. And even though the ISS was initially billed as a staging ground for future missions to the moon and to Mars, it's obviously never actually functioned as one. And it's certainly never been used as a hub for fucking space commerce unless you want to count the aforementioned space tourists.
Yeah, but to be fair, Wernher von Braun also had some very specific rules about the skull shapes he wanted on those space stations.
That's true. So why the hell spend $150 billion building a space station and another $3 billion a year maintaining it? Well, if you ask NASA or any of the other space agencies involved, it's for running experiments in microgravity and learning more about the risks of long-term human spaceflight. And by and large, they probably even believe themselves when they're saying that, right? But the real answer is because it's a fucking space station. Right? For reals. Like, I'm not saying valuable science hasn't been done and isn't currently being done aboard the ISS, but is $150 billion worth of science being done there? I mean, come on. That's a lot fucking harder to argue. I mean, we could have built 15 James Webb telescope-sized projects for that money. Right. And another one every 3 years for the money to maintain it. The reality is that we have a space station because that's really fucking cool. And a bunch of nerds were able to sell it to various Congresses and parliaments without admitting that that was the real reason.
We could get so much more done if we branded it right. Hey, Congress, think of universal healthcare like a space couch fort. What do you think?
Yeah. Also, not to play against brand here, but seeing as governments have tricked us into largely funding police and military occupations of their own countries with more than half of our taxes, I feel like they owed not killing one, right? Like not killing should get one.
Now, of course, the ISS can't last forever. After all, as people whose idioms aren't bound by the realities of physics often say, what goes up must come down. And eventually, the ISS will outlive its usefulness. I feel like you could make a pretty good argument that it already has. It was originally slated to be decommissioned in 2024. NASA says they want to keep it operational through 2030, but Russia's way less committed to that timeline. What's more, Russia also wants to transfer several of their decommissioned modules to a different space station that they plan on building. How much of that is Putin's bluster and how much of it is a real plan is anybody's guess. But one way or the other, at the very least, most of this thing has to eventually be deorbited at some point. And that brings up the obvious question of what the fuck you do with a football field sized spaceship that you don't need anymore, right? It's not like you can fucking land the thing.
Well, here in Chicago, a football field sized thing nobody needs anymore is called a Soldiers Field.
Okay, honestly, can't we just like announce that it's in the name of getting back to normal, and then they can just crash it into Times Square and people won't care? Like, oh, no, it's really, what do you want to live inside forever? Blam, blash.
So now the various bodies responsible for the station have considered a couple of options for how to end the mission. And you'll be happy to hear that none of them are the Skylab style drop it on Earth and hope it doesn't hit a people part variety. In NASA euphemisms, by the way, that's called natural orbital decay with random reentry. In normal English, it's called crashing. Now, that's actually what happens to most orbital spacecraft when they outlive their usefulness. But that's because most of them are small enough that they can be pretty certain that they're going to burn up all the way on reentry. That is not the case when you're talking about a 6-bedroom house with a football field's worth of solar panels strapped to it, okay? NASA estimates that at least 16% of the station would survive reentry. Might sound like a small percentage, but we're talking about over 148,000 pounds of debris here.
Oh my God, Noah, please tell me the plan is to invent a new nudge-based technology.
Spoilers. No, so one plan involves deorbiting it, but periodically boosting it at the point of reentry such that it has enough time to burn all the way up.
Yes.
I feel like that works great.
Nudger.
Well, yeah, exactly. But like, what if the nudger parts burn up first, right? That's not going to work out well. So another option is a controlled deorbit that aims for a specific spot in the ocean where it's unlikely to do any damage. The problem here is we've never done anything remotely like that, and who the fuck knows if it would work. The Wikipedia article seems pretty confident they could do it using a modified Progress spacecraft to help with a controlled deorbit. But again, who the fuck knows? Right. I'm sure there were a lot of people who were pretty sure we could safely deorbit Skylab as well.
Okay, real quick, Noah, how is this thing not actually named the USS Sword of Damocles?
And if you had to summarize what you learned in one sentence, Noah, what would it be?
If you're going to stick 1 million pounds of shit in the sky, you should probably figure out in advance how you're going to get it back down.
That is pre-planning. All right. Are you ready for the quiz?
I am.
All right, Noah, you mentioned the most prominent plans for how to end the ISS mission, but what are some other less conventional plans? A, let Kim Jong-un nuke it and hope he calms down. B, load it up with space-hungry billionaires before we do A.
Nice.
Or C, switch its funding to the education department, at which point it will magically disappear.
All right, so the space debris is too bad with A and B. I'm going to have to go C.
That's correct.
All right, Noah, I think we can all agree that a Perfect Strangers TV show on a space station would be pretty amazing. What's another great idea for a space travel related TV show? A, the 3 stages. B, three-stage rocket. Okay.
Yeah.
B, SATCOM in the middle. C, the free fall guy. Or D, Better Call Saul. Saul. Better Call Saul.
All right, well, you have to really see it written, but it is definitely D, Better Call Saul.
Better Call Saul, absolutely.
All right, Noah. Being in outer space for any length of time is, by all accounts, full of discomfort and absurdity. Which fact below best exemplifies this reality? A, the space condom tube things they invented for dudes to piss in only come in sizes large and extra large because astronauts are insecure about the size of their helmets. B, when you shit in space, the turd doesn't fall. So you have to kind of scrape the shit off your ass into a space Floby vacuum. C, farts in space are a real problem. The gases are flammable and pose serious risks. Huge studies have been done by NASA scientists to feed astronauts a diet low in fart potential. D, if the thought of any of this makes you cry, the tears just sort of cling to your eye sockets, mocking you.
They do, yeah.
Man, I'm supposed to get this wrong, so I'm going to go with C. The farts are they're fine. They're fine.
Yeah, they really did modify their diet. In fact, the first diet that they proposed created more farts rather than less.
Well, even still, you win, Noah.
Oh, I did win. Okay, in that case, it's E, all of the above. Well, thank you for that last minute win, Cecil. I'm going to reward you with an essay next week.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. Well, for Eli, Tom, and Noah, I'm Cecil. Thanking you for hanging out with us today. We'll be back next week, and by then, I will be an expert on something else. Between now and then, listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to help keep this show going, you can make a per episode donation at patreon.com/citationpod, or you could leave us a 5-star review everywhere you can. Like to get in touch with us, check out past episodes, connect with us on social media, or check the show notes. Be sure to check out citationpod.com.
Our podcasts, though, just not the
Podcasts
daily.
will work. It's fine. They'll get to one of them eventually.
Yeah,
That's fair.
probably.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to mourn the death of one of the bravest spacefarers ever to take to the sky. A life tragically cut short too soon. Here to perform the psalm for the dead is his commanding officer.
That's it!
Tom, run!
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely. And parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/getstarted. That's GREENLIGHT.com/getstarted.